My name is Tom Siddons. This is my CMT story. A week ago, I announced on social media that I'm hosting a charity event to raise funds for a disease called CMT. That caused a lot of confusion in my social circle because almost nobody has ever heard of the disease called CMT, and most people I know weren't aware that I had a serious medical condition. It was obvious that I limp, and a lot of people have come up to me and said they just assumed I walked funny because either I hurt my foot or I had a cramp. A few people said I was an old school pimp. One guy said he thought I was a pirate. Well, I'm not a pirate, and I don't have a cramp, and I didn't hurt my foot, and I'm only a little bit of a pimp. But the reason I walk the way I walk is because I have a disease called CMT. CMT stands for Charcot-Marie Tooth Disease, and it's named after the three scientists who discovered it: Charcot, Marie, and Tooth. For simplicity, for the rest of this time, I'm going to refer to it as CMT. It affects the muscles in the forearms and lower legs, and there's probably a lot of other scientific and medical stuff that I'm not qualified to talk about, but suffice to say, the way it's affected me has been primarily in my legs. It's something you're born with, and I was born with it. And when I was discharged as an infant from the hospital, I came home with casts on my legs because my feet were all twisted up. And after they took the casts off, I had to sleep with braces on my feet for a couple of years, and I remember seeing those braces as a kid. When I learned to walk, I walked way up on my tippy toes, which is a symptom of CMT. I was definitely not as coordinated, a little bit more clumsy than most kids. But, you know, back then in the 70s, parents didn't go run into the doctor every time their kid sniffled or got a little bump or got a little rash or demonstrated an inability to develop basic motor skills. We just kind of, accepted the way things were and moved on. At some point in my youth, I got a diagnosis for cerebral palsy. Obviously, that was not a correct diagnosis, but that was, whatever. That's the way it was. No one ever bothered to tell me, and I just went through life walking funny, in pain all the time, having to wear funny shoes. I had to buy special shoes, and then they put these like heels on them. I looked like Gene Simmons from Kiss or something with these big clunky shoes, or Frankenstein or something. I was always very self-conscious about that. But the worst part was I would wake up in the middle of the night with agonizing cramps in my leg. I mean, my legs would be locked up and I would just be screaming, and there was no way to make it stop. And some nights I'd wake up once and it would last 5 minutes and go back to bed. Other nights it would last for hours and they would come and go. And I had no idea of what they were, no understanding, and I didn't know when they were going to come or not. And that was horrible. As far as like being at school and being with friends and stuff, everybody had their difficulties. I walked funny. Some kids were, ugly. I don't know. Some kids were dumb. Some kids were smart. We all had our things to overcome. I would say I got teased for the way I walked, but you know what? If I walked fine, I would have got teased for something else. Nobody really beat up on me or anything like that. I had a lot of friends. I just couldn't run as fast as them. By about age 8, I discovered the bicycle, and the bicycle was an equalizer for me. If I was on a bike, I was at least as fast, if not faster, than everyone around me. The CMT didn't seem to affect me on a bike, which explains why to this day I have a passion for bicycles. Fast forward to my senior year of high school, my guidance counselor calls me down to her office to tell me the good news that because of my cerebral palsy, I qualified for financial aid for college. Well, imagine my surprise as an 18-year-old senior about to graduate high school and go off to college, to be informed by a almost complete stranger that I had cerebral palsy. So I told her I do not have cerebral palsy, and she opened up my medical record, and sure enough, there it was in black and white that I had cerebral palsy. And apparently my parents didn't want to worry me, so they never bothered to tell me that I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. So in order to get the financial aid for college, I had to go back to the doctors for some more testing. And it was there that the doctors discovered that I did not have cerebral palsy, that I was misdiagnosed. And in fact, the diagnosis was for a not very well understood disease called Charcot-Marie Tooth Disease, or CMT. And while at that doctor's appointment, we were able to pieced together that my grandfather, who lost the ability to walk at some point in his 40s, also had CMT. And so in that couple of day period, I learned that I had cerebral palsy, and then that I didn't, and then that I had a disease called CMT that my grandfather had, and that he lost the ability to walk in his mid-40s. So I left that doctor's appointment thinking, well, in about 20 years, I'm going to wind up like my grandfather. And on the one hand, that was a little bit terrifying, but on the other hand, it was something that motivated me to really work hard and to really soak up as much life as I could before I got what I was used to seeing my grandfather like. So I got into college, and I hit college really hard, and I went out and I got myself a job at a large corporation with the attitude to advance as fast as I could, as quick, and get up the ladder as high as I could in that organization, and to earn as much money and provide as much security for my future, so that when the day comes that I lose the ability to walk and wind up kind of stuck in a chair like my grandfather, I'll be set. And I dedicated my entire 20s to building that career and to building that security for my future. In my later 20s, I met who is now my wife, Noelia. I married Noelia, and I never mentioned that I had a serious medical condition called CMT. And about a year into our marriage, she kind of put two and two together and realized, all the weird ways I did things and the way I walked and waking up screaming with cramps in the middle of the night. And she made me go to the doctor. And at the doctor, I admitted to the doctor that, at some point when I was like 18, I was diagnosed with some disease. I don't know exactly what it's called. I think it's called CMT. And both my doctor and my wife were pretty pissed off at me that I hadn't shared that with them. And as a result of that doctor visit, I started working with a neurologist and a geneticist. And those are the things that pretty much take me to why I'm telling my CMT story right now, and to why I'm hosting a charity event to raise funds for CMT. Because up until recently, I didn't want anyone to know I had CMT. I had the type of job and the type of career where you really don't want to share personal health details about yourself with the public at large. And so I kept it to myself. Well, I'm about to retire next week. And because I no longer have that desire to hide my personal health records, I can be a little bit more public about my situation. The other thing retirement gives me is time. And so now I have more time to help out and try and raise funds. And the third reason I want to do that is because I am a beneficiary of other people's fundraising. And the reason I'm a beneficiary is because of my son, Tommy. My wife and I were married for over a decade before we conceived a child. And the reason was because the doctors kept telling us that genetic advancements were progressing and that methodologies would be in place in just a few years so that we would be able to conceive a child without passing on CMT to that child. And my wife and I worked with neurologists and geneticists, and we followed the progress of the research. And then all of a sudden, some of it came to fruition, and it was in testing. And then it was available, but only available in Canada. And then it was available, and it was available in the United States, but my insurance didn't cover it. And then it was available in the United States, and my insurance covered it. And finally, my wife and I were able to take advantage of that technology, and we were able to give birth to a child who does not have CMT. And now I would like to be able to give back so that other people can take advantage of whatever research is being done right now and perhaps cure their children who have CMT or prevent more children from getting CMT. Now, I had a lot of pain. I obviously had like a shame and denial about having the disease, but I can't sit here and whine and complain about the life I've lived. In fact, CMT gave me such a motivation to squeeze as much life into my 20s and 30s as I could that I built up the type of career and set up a future for myself so that at age 44, I'm able to retire. In addition, I thought, you know what? In 1981, I watched the Ironman triathlon with my mom. And I remember watching the guys. They swim 2.5 miles, and then they bike 112 miles, and then they run a full marathon. And I was always fascinated by that. But I always thought that's not for me because, you know, I got these screwed up legs. And then with this new attitude I had about squeezing in life, I registered for an Ironman in, what year was it, 2005, and went out to Arizona, and I swam 2.5 miles, and I rode a bike 112 miles, and I ran a full marathon. And then while I was out there, I earned a lottery slot to go out to Hawaii to do the Kona Ironman. And 6 months later, I did it all over again. Swam 2.5 miles, rode a bike 112 miles, and ran a full marathon. And what I learned at those two events was that I was a pretty fast swimmer because CMT didn't really affect my swimming. So I signed up for a swimming event local here in Miami, down in Key Largo, and I came in first place. I thought, well, maybe it was a fluke. So I signed up for another one in Miami Beach, and I came in first place again. And then I said, well, that was pretty interesting. Why don't I try to swim 10K? I don't know, that's like 100 miles or something. I don't understand how to calculate kilometers and miles, but I was able to swim 10K. And I was doing all that so I could squeeze it all in before I lost my ability to walk. And you know what doing all that did? It's prolonged my ability to walk, and it's made me stronger. And I'm actually in better physical condition now than I was in my teens and 20s. So because of CMT, I was able to do some great things. And you know what? It's easy to feel bad for yourself. When I got out there to Hawaii and I saw the guys practicing, and these are the best guys in the world. I used to see them on TV, and here I am. I'm going to get to do this race with these guys. By the way, I got my ass kicked. And I went down to the swim area, and I had to take my shoes off, and I had to walk over to where the water was. And I got that familiar feeling like, oh my God, because I can hide my limp in shoes, but when I'm in my bare feet, there's no denying something's wrong. And I started getting that self-conscious feeling. And I took off my shoes, and as I turned around to walk by the water, I had to stop to let a woman pass by me. She was holding a guy by the shoulders. And there was another person with her holding a guy by the ankles. And this was a guy who I don't know what you call it, a paraplegic, I guess. He didn't have the ability to use his legs. He could use his arms, but not his legs. And they put him in the water, and they tucked a little floaty thing between his legs, strapped his feet together, and the guy went out and swam. And the next day, he did the Ironman. And I said to myself, there you are, worried about this, little bent little foot. This guy would trade with me in a second. And I've got a million examples of that in my life where, I have the opportunity to feel sorry for myself, and then I look over next to me and I see someone who has far more opportunity to feel sorry for themselves than me, and they don't. And these are the kind of things that give me strength. I hate to brag. I know the old joke is, how do you know the guy that's done the Ironman? Don't worry, he'll tell you. I just told you. But it's a great example of overcoming something like this. All right, my battery died, and I was kind of getting off on a tangent anyway. But back on track. We're all human. We all have things we need to overcome. And we all need each other's help. I need your help at my charity event. So please come out September 12th, 10 a.m., Virginia Key Bike Park, and ride 10 laps with me to help raise funds for CMT. Those funds will help researchers come up with solutions and cures and preventions which will help people who are afflicted with CMT overcome their limitations so that they could live happy, painless, active lifestyles. And no one loves an active lifestyle more than us mountain bikers, right? So I hope I see you on September 12th at 10 a.m. at Virginia Key Bike Park. Come on out.